Okay, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see so many people. I guess everybody is stuck at home with nothing better to do. So anyway, my name is Catherine Brown. I'm an anthropologist, but mostly I focus on archaeology. I'm a professor in the anthropology department. My specialty is the rise of complexity, and I focus mostly on the ancient Maya civilization. So my research takes me to Central America every year. Of course, I didn't get to go there this year because of COVID, but next year I'll be going back down. And so most of my scholarly writing includes journal articles and edited book chapters or contributed book chapters, and so I write abstracts for those, as well as writing abstracts for conference papers. And then I mentor both MA students and PhD students, so I'll be happy to kind of talk about like the differences between a type of abstract that you would write for a conference paper, a journal article, and or a master's thesis or a dissertation. And so I'll take questions at the end. And instead of kind of preparing a formal PowerPoint presentation, I just thought I would provide a few tips of what I use as guidelines for writing a successful outline, and then make this so that it can be, after we stop recording, more of a dialogue for you guys. You can ask questions and then I'll try to answer the questions tailored to your different disciplines. I have about six tips for you guys. But first, in order to really make and write a successful abstract, the number one thing you need to think about is starting with a good title. And so oftentimes we forget about the title to the very end. And that, I think, is a little bit of a mistake. So make sure you write your title before you write your abstract. So start with a really good title. And just a couple of things that I think make a good title that actually works is that it needs to be engaging. It needs to utilize keywords. And so those keywords are really important. I'm going to return to those keywords a little bit later. You don't want to make a long title, so you don't want your title to be too long or too wordy, but you want it to provide enough detail to frame your study. What your paper is about. You want to make sure that it frames it nicely. Anyway, if you are writing a witty or clever title, which a lot of people like to do, you need to make sure you know who your audience is. So if you're going to write something humorous, make sure you are you've got the right audience for that. And so I recommend sort of staying away from that because sometimes people will critique you on your title before they even read your paper and or your abstract. If you have this sort of clever, witty, humorous title that can kind of rub people the wrong way. With that said, I sometimes do that. I just wrote a paper on some Maya scholar rooms where people were training Maya scribes. And in that was probably where they were passing on sacred knowledge. And so I called it the Chamber of Secrets and sort of used a Harry Potter theme there. But I knew the audience, and it was at a conference that was more regional, and I figured it would be okay. So make sure with those titles, those witty titles, that you know the audience. So that's tip number one, really focus on that title. Tip number two is remember your abstracts are very important. This is one of the most important thing about your paper is the abstracts. This is the first opportunity you have to grab your reader. So make sure that you kind of reach out and grab them with that particular abstract. I like to think of an abstract as, and use the analogy of a movie trailer. And, you know, we all know what, you know, a good movie's like, but if we watch the trailers first, right? The movie trailer is really good. So you want to make sure your abstract is excellent. So it just sort of grabs those readers. It needs to be enticing and informative, pulling your reader in, wanting them to kind of dive into your particular paper. It also needs to highlight your research and why, you know, basically tell them why they need to read your paper. That's really key. Why they need to read your paper in that abstract. And this is the reality of the scholarly world today. Oftentimes the abstract is the only thing that people read. So you need to kind of remember that. We all do that. And in fact, when I'm doing research, oftentimes I read the title, I read the abstract. If I'm vaguely interested, I go to the introduction and I read that. I may scan the methods and then I go straight to the summary and conclusion, right? And so this is what we all sort of do. And you want to make sure in your abstract you get the person to say, okay, I need to read further. I need to get into the paper itself. And so kind of pull them in. All right, tip number 3. Ideally, if you're going to write a good abstract, you should have written your paper first. Okay, so this is in the ideal world. So I'm going to say ideally, write your paper first. And I want to return to that movie trailer analogy. Think about this. You couldn't produce a really good movie trailer if you hadn't filmed the movie already, right? Because you wouldn't have anything to draw from. And you need that. It's really, really important to have that that already done so that you can draw from that. And then also think about a movie trailer. If that you've written them, you know, the movie's already filmed, but it's not edited, and a bunch of those edited scenes are knocked out of there, and you put them in the movie trailer, that can be a problem because it's false advertising about what's going to be in that particular movie. So kind of think about that when you're writing your abstract. So that's the ideal world, right? Write the paper first, then write the abstract second. That's the rule of thumb there, that way it should be done. But in the real world, this isn't always realistic, right? To have a full version of your paper written before writing an abstract, especially if this is a conference paper. I don't know how many of you guys are going and presenting at conferences. They call for abstracts 6 to 9 months before the conference, right? And so, I mean, lots of times 6 to 9 months before the conference, you may not even have all the data collected at that particular point in time. And so you've got to write an abstract that's going to reflect something that you haven't even finished collecting all the data on and present at this conference. So in those particular situations, I like to make myself do this. And this is something you, as a scholar, you need to kind of focus and make yourself do it. Write a detailed outline of the paper you wish to present. The paper you would like to present. You may not have all the data at this point, but you know, kind of think about what the data might be and write a detailed outline of your paper. And then from that detailed outline of your paper, you can then write an abstract. And it really does 2 things for you, right? You have the abstract completed and submitted 6 to 9 months before you do the presentation. And then 2 weeks before the conference, when you sit down to write your paper, we all know that's the real world, you can pull out that detailed outline that you already did, and then from there, write your paper. preferably not on the airplane on the way down to the conference, but ahead of time. And you'll be so happy that you actually took that extra step to write that outline, and then from the outline, write your abstract. Okay, so tip number 4 for me, if you forget everything else in from this particular workshop, just remember these 2 things. All abstracts should contain why and how statements. All abstracts should contain why and how statements. Why your research is important and how your research addresses a problem or a gap in knowledge. And so if you forget everything else, just remember why and how, and then you can kind of make everything else up around it. But make sure why and how statements are in there. So tip number 5, and this is just a quick formula. So if you're taking notes, take notes on this. This is a quick formula for writing a good abstract. Always begin with an introduction statement that includes includes important background information about your study, all right? Or the region your study is taking place in, or the field it's taking place in, or something like that. So make sure you have an introduction statement that includes background information. This should be 1 to 2 sentences, and it could take 3 sentences, but you want to kind of limit it and try to make it as concise as possible. And then this should not be a restatement of your title. In your abstract, nowhere should you have your title. Your title should stand alone, and then you have your abstract separate, okay? So then make sure that you have that introduction and the background and a sentence or 2 at the very beginning. And that's number 1. Then you need to follow that sentence or those couple of sentences, that introduction section, with a sentence or 2 explaining why. And so this is back to the why your research is important and or different. So make sure here you can say it's important and it's different. You know, you want it, why is it important, and you know, why it's different. Here you can explain the gap in the knowledge that your study fills. So think about it that way. So if there's a problem or a gap in knowledge that your study fills, like nobody else is doing this, or scholars don't quite understand this aspect of this, therefore my study is, this is why my study is really important, right? All right, then you follow, and that can be 2 sentences, it can be 3 sentences, depending on the word limit of the abstract. Then you're going to want to follow that with a sentence or 2 on how your research addressed that gap in knowledge, okay, or the problem. So you do why it was important, and then how your research addressed this. And this is where you want to include information about your methods or the techniques you used. And so this is, I think, very important. So the techniques you used for your study, or the methods you used for your study. And this will probably be 1 or 2 sentences. And then follow this with a sentence or 2 or 3, depending on word count and what your findings are, that highlights that newly collected data of yours and your findings. And so that will follow that sort of methods. Then you're going to want to make sure you have your findings in there, your data that you collected, what you actually found. And then you want to end the abstract on a very positive note. You want to make sure your reader knows how impressive you are, what you did, what you accomplished. So the end of your abstract should have a conclusion sentence or 2, but usually it's better if you can put it in just 1. So it's just sort of like, boom, mic drop, the end, right? And this is going to highlight the significance of your finding. So you tell them what your finding is, and then you tell them why it's so important, it's significant, and this, you know, what the meaning is behind that. Basically, you leave them right there, okay, with this is why it's so significant. This is what I did. This is what I accomplished. Now, sometimes, depending on the discipline, and if it's a conference or if it's a dissertation or a master's thesis, depending on what you're doing, you may want to have one final sentence beyond your mic drop. And that would be just a, sort of an optional ending that would include the importance of this and implications for future studies. Not all of them need to have that, and you can kind of decide whether or not you think your abstract does. Oftentimes with dissertations, you might want to say, these are the implications for future studies. You know, I filled in this gap, and this has moved us this much further to be able to answer these other questions through future studies. So I think that's very important. Now, in the sort of my final tip for you guys with abstract writing, you're going to want to make sure you have 3 keywords in there. So your key, you can have more keywords, but you're going to want to have at least 3 keywords and make sure that they're included in there. And you kind of pick out these keywords you want your reader to know. Like I'm a Maya archaeologist, and so somewhere in my abstract, I need to get the region where I'm working, the civilization I'm studying, right? The ancient Maya civilization. So Maya would be my keyword. The time period I'm looking at would be another key word. And then whether or not I'm examining ancient patterns of warfare or religion, ancient religious practices, religion and warfare, or whatever would be keywords for me. And so I would make sure that they're included in that particular abstract that I'm doing. And so you may want to have 1 or 2 of those keywords or 3 of those keywords in your title as well. So just some final thoughts on writing abstracts. This abstract writing isn't actually, everybody thinks, oh, it's easy. It's actually really not. Abstract writing is hard. It's sometimes easier to write the entire paper than to write just the abstract. And so don't beat yourself up about, you know, having to spend, I have spent 5 hours on an abstract before, and then I'm fine with it, or I love it at the end. But you want to always set aside the time you need to write an abstract. If it's due at 3 p.m., don't start at 2 p.m. because you're going to end up being extremely frustrated, because it is challenging to write an abstract. It takes practice to write an abstract. And I recommend, you know, just in one of the final thoughts, that you get a peer to read your abstract, or get with your advisor and have your advisor write your abstract. If the advisor is busy, can't read the abstract, then another mentor for you. You know, don't be afraid to send an abstract out, and then let them read it, because they'll have fresh eyes on it and give you really good feedback. So you can incorporate the feedback into it. And I highly recommend peer feedback as well. Get one of your fellow graduate students to read your abstracts. And then the more you write, the easier it gets. But I will tell you that I still, you know, I'm a full professor. I still struggle with writing abstracts sometimes. It's very painful for me. It's easier to write the paper sometimes than to write that abstract. So, all right. So I am, oh, one other thing. If the abstract word limit is 250 words, don't do 251 and think you can sneak in an extra word. People really do look at that, and they do word counts, and sometimes you can just be kicked out of a symposium or conference because your abstract is one word over. So think of it as playing Price is Right. I don't know if you guys remember that show or even if it's still on, but you want to get as close as possible to the number, but not go over. So if it's a 250 word abstract, don't write 100 words. They're telling you how many words they want. They want 250 words or 300 words or whatever. So get as close to that as you possibly can without going over. So that's my final comment. I'm happy to take questions.
Yep, I'm going to shut the recording.